Um, this is the one of the final videos that we'll have. This is on chapter 17 of the American Government book on foreign policy. And yeah, this is actually one of my favorite chapters to discuss and to read, and maybe it'll inspire you guys to kind of think of these things as well. But let's get to it then, shall we? So in this episode, like and subscribe. We're talking about foreign policy, and here we have a picture of Teddy Roosevelt, if you can see the picture. President in the early 1900s, right? He says his famous approach to foreign policy was speak softly and carry a big stick, right? So I have here this kind of message was a line that President Roosevelt used in describing his foreign policy perspective, and it had to do with the idea of, don't have a lot of rhetoric, so it's kind of like the opposite of what President Trump does, although he would probably agree with the big stick component, and have the ability to do actions in the international realm, which again requires essentially having a strong military. Big stick, strong military. The president takes the leading role in U.S. foreign policy. So let me say that again. The president takes the leading role in U.S. foreign policy, which consists of discussing with other nations on important international issues. So again, the president in many ways is almost like the lead ambassador. It's a better way of almost thinking about the president. And so though they take a dominant role in domestic policy, which we kind of finished talking about before this chapter, through the use of the bully pulpit, which is also a term that came from Teddy Roosevelt. Their really important role comes in the international sphere, and that's where all their enumerated or written powers kind of make a lot more sense. Okay. So Congress also has key roles to perform in foreign policy, including approving treaties and agreements, allocating funds, and making war. And the Senate confirms key members of the executive branch, right? So like the Secretary of State has an important role with regards to foreign policy. So again, the other branches do impact foreign policy, but the president takes the lead, right? The president sets the tone. So keep that in mind. So what's our definition of foreign policy? So from the book from 628, the goals that a state, meaning a country, a country's officials seek to attain abroad and internationally around the world, the values that give rise to those objectives, and the means or instruments used to pursue them. And so the book tells us that the country of the United States has essentially 4 foreign policy goals. Again, like many of you might roll your eyes with some of this stuff, which I think is totally fine. So you're allowed to disagree, but this book and this class is just meant to give you a firm foundation of like the common thought. Doesn't mean it's correct. It means that this is what is kind of accepted to be the truth, if that makes sense. So the one we have protecting the U.S. and its citizens. So that kind of makes sense, right? So this is like military defense. The U.S. will use formal and informal power to ensure this protection. It also applies to securing the economic sphere internationally as well, right? So again, we have a lot of service members maybe in the class, and I often do teach, current and former service members. Like again, the U.S. Navy and the Marines, right? They do a lot to essentially protect trade internationally as well. So keep that in mind. The maintenance, number 2, of key resources and markets. That might be one many of you probably easily understand. This includes natural resources like petroleum and economic resources like foreign capital, meaning money. Number 3, the preservation of international balance of power. This means the maintaining of the United States' global supremacy. So right now we are kind of very much still the number 1 economy and number 1 military power. And so that being number 1, it has very beneficial. So the United States does things to try and maintain that position, right? Because it's to our advantage. So just have a little joke right there, USA, USA. And then the protection of human rights and democracy. Again, some of you might find this claim to be dubious, but it's true. This is why we're able to look at something like how China behaves and how it's very different than how we behave in the United States, and we're able to criticize it. But can the United States be better with regards to protecting human rights and democracy? I think that's true too. So again, this is the way to promote international stability, which is correlated to goals of peace around the world. So again, it seems like countries that have these kind of liberal democratic setups don't tend to go to war with each other. That's kind of like this international relations sphere, if any of you guys study that. So Canada and America don't seem to go to war with each other. England and the United States, England right now, United States and Germany, and these all countries have this thing in common, which are all kind of like different variants of democracy and capitalism. So if you study international relations, that's called democratic peace theory, is what that's called. But we won't really go over that. So the United States pursues these 4 primary foreign policy goals via different foreign policy types. So again, these are strategies to achieve those goals, and one way to do that is through trade policy. And again, this is very much in the United States under the control of the president. So like putting on tariffs is not a power of the Congress; it's a power of the president, even though it's a tax. So that's kind of interesting. deals with commerce flow of goods and services between countries. So again, these key terms the book talks about, I won't spend too much time on, what you should know, they'll be on the test: protectionism, free trade approach, and a balance of trade. Diplomacy is another way in which we get international goals achieved in foreign policy. So this refers to the establishment and maintenance of a formal relationship between countries. These relationships are formalized through the establishment of embassies and the sharing of ambassadors, and also consulates. And so with all this kind of Wuhan virus, coronavirus that's going on, the United States closed a consulate, I believe in Wuhan, maybe not Wuhan, but a city in China. And then China did the same thing by closing consulates in, say, I think Houston. So it's kind of like international intrigue going on. And there's a clip from John Adams you guys can watch where he is, like, at the time still during the Revolutionary War, and he's trying to establish this diplomatic relationship with the Dutch or Holland to kind of solidify the United States as being a country. So part of being a country is just other countries recognizing you. It's really weird. This is where you can kind of get to these kind of philosophical aspects of politics, but that's why again, I'm interested in these things. And then we have these ideas, the key terms of hard power. So this is guns, bombs, and bullets, and soft power. This is like the media, Hollywood, the things that president or politicians say. That's kind of like soft power. Right? So there's a big difference there. You want to know the difference. Through intelligence gathering, like the CIA, the Central Intelligence Agency, related to the power of power of international power, discussed above. That's kind of where I have to fix that. Deals with the overt and covert gathering of information on foreign sources. Generally of interest will be information that has strategic value for the United States. So yeah, one of the things, again, you guys can do this. You can go to the State Department and see how they rate, say, dangers for American citizens. And so interestingly and sadly, there are places in Mexico that are as dangerous as, like, say, war zones in Syria, and you guys can look that up for yourself. And you can also look up the World CIA Fact Book. So the CIA gathers this information, like the demographics of a country, and they actually publish that. You guys can read that. So if you want to know how many people of this religion are in this country, you can find that information out by typing in the World CIA Fact Book. I had to learn that in college. I didn't know that on my own. Here we have a picture of President Reagan. It's not the best picture, from the 80s. Trust but verify. It actually came from a Russian proverb that he used. So this was his approach to foreign policy dealing with Russia, in particular the Soviet Union, which was like, okay, we're going to trust what they have to say, or we're going to go with it, but we're always going to verify it. So obviously that kind of negates the trust. So it basically just means, like, verify what people are saying. We're not just going to be blindly trusting people. Foreign aid also, so, giving money to different countries is a way of promoting their stability, right? So U.S. provides material and economic aid to other countries. The aim of this is usually to provide stability. This makes it better for business interests and tend to lessen threats towards the United States, like terrorism, right? So giving money, helping countries is a way of helping ourselves. Global environmental policy deals with the world-level environmental matters. So obviously the one here is that people are most concerned with is global warming and climate change and things like that. Then there are unique challenges. This is really, really important. There are unique challenges when dealing with foreign policy. Because, again, the world is a big, complicated place with different ethnicities and cultures and values. So here we have, there's no overarching international authority in the international sphere. So there is no super country that can tell other countries what to do. So that's called anarchic. There's no power structure. And this makes coordination difficult, right? So America can be coordinated on the COVID response, even though each state does its own thing, because the federal government has certain rules and regulations that all the other 50 states have to follow. But there is no federal international level. A lot of you might even know what the UN is, the United Nations, and think that's kind of like this overarching structure. It's not. It's just essentially a somewhat democratic body where countries can essentially talk to each other, but no one has to listen to what the United Nations says or does. So the United States, because we're the biggest and the strongest, we often don't. And I would argue that's probably a good thing in many instances. Number two, the U.S. will have different views than others regarding the role of government. So again, even if you're a more left-wing person, like both of our political parties in the United States are liberal, so hopefully you know what that means by now. And so it means we're very focused on the individual, where other countries like China are communist, and they don't really have any interest in supporting the individual. They care about what's good for the Communist Party of China, which they would say is good for the country of China, but that seems unlikely, right? Differences in the forms of government. So again, that's the same example. Having a one-party rule in China, a communist party, versus having a two-party system that's democratically chosen in our case. Very, very different. Issues that transcend borders are going to make things difficult, like terrorism and climate change. And varying conditions in the world, right? So different countries have different realities, different things, economic, social upheaval, geographic. And so, for instance, like Not every country has the same capacity to be a world economic engine because they might be landlocked. So we're talking about the actual geography of a country. So some countries don't have access to the ocean, right? If you look at countries in Africa, there's countries in the middle, and they kind of have to go through other countries to get their goods and services out. That is a disadvantage. And there's nothing evil or malevolent. It's just kind of like bad history and luck that ends up being the case. Then we get to these other aspects here, instruments of foreign policy. Broadly focused foreign policy outputs. So these are things, it's like kind of broad general. Public laws, National Security Act, Patriot Act, Homeland Security are examples. War powers resolutions. This was meant to check the power of the executive. So I would really, really make sure you focus on the war powers resolution. So basically, like a president can start a conflict, but they're going to have to go back to Congress to get authorization and essentially money for that. So that's something that happened. That's very, very important. That puts a check on the president's power internationally, right? Here we get again reauthorizations agreements. So the USMCA is an agreement. It's not quite as strong as a treaty, but it has these economic implications for Mexico, Canada, and the United States, and appointments, right? So we get the sharply focused foreign policy, much more the domain of the presidential influence, very particular policies. Dealing with international crisis like the Cuban Missile Crisis with the coronavirus, it's a particular thing that the president's going to be able to act on. Conducting presidential summits, it's a key term, make sure we know that. Know what Camp David is. So Camp David's an area back east. It's a military base where oftentimes they'll have these summits for peace or negotiations, so the president will use this area. The use of military force, right, the president directs that, and Congress can provide emergency funding for different things with regards to foreign policy. So there have been times, I think, in the 90s, the Mexican government, the country was going bankrupt, so our Congress came and was like, okay, we're going to bail out Mexico because it's good for America if Mexico doesn't have a shaky economy, right? Nearly all major outputs of foreign policy require a formal congressional role in order to be carried out, right? Foreign policy might be done by executive say-so in times of a crisis and in a handful of sole executive agreements that actually pertain to major issues. In general, however, a consultative relationship between the branches of government and foreign policy is usually the result of constitutional sharing of power, right? So the president does have things that are going to impact us, but again, the Congress is going to have its say, and then also, the judicial branch will have its say as well. And so I'll end with this. These are super important key terms you will be tested on. I'm not going to cover them. It's up to you to ask me questions and read on your own. Isolationism, liberal internationalism, neoconservatism, and selective engagement. And then again, these are approaches to foreign policy. So I have, a few more California politics videos to show put up. Now that I'm pretty much finishing these up, I'm going to link them so you guys can either go through Canvas or just click on the next video. So again, make sure you're watching, make sure you're liking and subscribing, supporting my Patreon, and hopefully this is inspiring some kind of curiosity in many of you. And again, if you're not interested in this stuff, you just got to be interested enough to try and get a good grade in the class. So with that, I bid you all adieu, and I will see you in class and in the next videos.